Hello all heroes and welcome back to Invincible Guarding the Globe, and today we're going to be doing a bit of a detailed guide into the CECIL'S Nightmare mode. This event has been out for a few weeks now, so we've gotten to play with it pretty good. Now, what has actually truly spurred this video onward is that there was recently a infographic guide put on the Discord. Credit for this goes to the ever popular and helpful Phili. It's Phili. I don't know how to pronounce the name. I'm stupid. But they have put out this infographic here. Also, it does have a little note featuring Tyler, so thanks to Tyler as well. Who is Tyler, you may ask? If you don't know who Tyler is, then you haven't pressed on the leaderboard button. Tyler is one of the main whales of the game, very regularly topping the charts, at least in the top 3, most of the time in number 1 for being totally honest. So, you know, big thanks to Tyler for single-handedly paying the salaries of the developers. So yeah, we're gonna get into this guide. I'll mention at the end as well, but I'm gonna put a link to Phili's Discord down in the description below, so you can go there for more infographics and information such as this. So, CECIL'S Nightmare tips. First of all, use solely fast range heroes for the first few levels that you can clear in 2 to 4 seconds to maximize your score. So, talking about the first few here, especially once you get through like 5, they're very easy. They're made of paper. They're nothing. So some characters you could use for that. You want to think about characters like Robot, like Adam Eve, Angstrom, the Machine Gun Mauler Twin. Characters where, as long as you have them decently strong, they can just tear through the enemy like crazy because they don't have any stats to speak of. You can also use Magmaniac and Kursk if you do have them built up, but they are rare characters and extremely hard to properly build, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Really, your goal for those first few is to just squeeze every single point humanly possible out of these first few stages. Next, choose solely DPS characters for the next levels to maximize your score. No need for tanks or healers / utility characters with low damage. So if we're talking like, let's say from 5 all the way up to, we'll say 15 for now. You could probably treat this a little bit higher, depending on your score or your team, but we'll say through 15. You don't need to bring Robot. You don't need to bring Adam Eve. Not only are the enemies made of paper, but they hit like paper. They're not going to do anything to you. So instead of bringing a Robot, bring an Omni-Man or bring a Doc Seismic or somebody who can just help you slam and jam through the enemies as fast as possible. You usually want to try and get it under 20 seconds for 3 stars. That seems to be the threshold for that 3-star point, and especially every 5 or so is when you really want to try and get that 3rd star for the access cards, the dossiers. In other cases, you might get gems or lab coins. Just kind of something to keep in mind there is those first few, you don't need to worry too much. Just use your strongest DPS characters to plow through those first few stages. Next, we have this tip here. A character dying deducts points, so once you run into troubles like that, slowly start to rotate in your tanks, healers, and utilities to give your team more survivability at the cost of team score. So in my particular case, I kind of started hitting issues after 20 on this particular one. I was still able to get through 25, but I absolutely did need to mix in some utility characters to make sure that nobody got murdered by 3 Doc Seismics. And then after that point, I didn't really see the 3rd star ever. You want to, once you get to this point, you want to prioritize just clearing. Even if you're only getting 2 stars, that's okay. It is better than nothing. Even if you're only getting 1 star, that gold is still better than nothing. Don't get hung up on trying to always get 3 stars and being like, oh, well, if I didn't get 3 stars on this, there's no reason to move on. Take the 2 stars, keep going. Don't worry about it. At that point, just focus on clearing. Put in your Allens, your Monster Girls, your Titans, and then, of course, your Adam Eves and your Robots to keep your team going. Next, we do have, don't forget to always put your best artifacts and gear on the characters that you are actively using in a nightmare level. I'm really bad about this. I am really bad about this. For example, let's say that it was a criminal event. I could put my gear from Green Ghost onto Angstrom, as Angstrom is a support character just like Green Ghost. I tend to not do that. I'm bad. I'm very bad on that one because I totally forget that I can actually move gear. Like, for example, Invincible's gear I can move to duplicate if I wanted. I'm usually a little better about the artifacts. I usually remember to move them. Sometimes I don't bother when I really should. But point is, don't forget that nothing is locked. You can shuffle things around as needed to give yourself the strength needed to get through the stages. Next, we do have turn off auto until you are past the point where you'd still have a chance to reach a score of 3,800. The ability animation takes away important seconds to hit the time mark of 20 seconds. This also applies to GDA alerts that are like the 15-minute quick ones. Animations, the auto battling is weird in that your main abilities actually take up time. Even though it kind of stops the fight for their little animation, the time keeps on ticking. It's very strange. So until you actually start having a problem mowing through the enemies, you can leave auto off and the strongest characters will still just blow right through the enemy and it will be fine. Replay a lot. Battles can sometimes vary up to 1,000 points depending on RNG. Examples, early rounds versus Invincibles or Red Rush can be replayed until you manage to burst them without their invulnerability trigger at all. I personally have very rarely gotten lucky in that regard, fighting things like Invincibles, the Immortal, Red Rush, Green Ghost. They tend to trigger their I'm not gonna die abilities pretty reliably, but every now and then, you can get lucky where your character just so happens to crit at the right time and can put them down before they trigger their shield. So don't be afraid to retry a few times if you feel like you can squeeze out a few more points, especially against those tricky characters like Invincible and Immortal. Some other tips here. Invincible is a melee that is fine to put on the back line without losing time when moving forward, since he has a dash attack at the start of the battle. So Invincible's a special case, and this was recently patched to work properly. But his main ability, if you do get him past Epic Plus, at the beginning of the battle, in addition to getting an attack boost, he goes for the enemy with the highest attack power. And when it says attacks, it means he just straight up dashes. I mean, it is just, he is, at one point he is at the beginning, and the other point he is beating up the enemy. This cuts down on the fact that most melee characters have to land and then go to the enemy to, punch them. Invincible doesn't worry about that. He just dashes and goes right for it. The only caveat to this is every now and then, depending on the enemy and the placement, sometimes he'll dash and then he kind of has to chase him down a little bit. It's a little weird, but it's usually not that big of a deal and is still a time save. Certainly is also helpful that Invincible is one of the strongest DPSs in the game, so not only is he great damage, he doesn't even have that issue of animation time. Placement is key. Examples, put your Epic Plus Omni-Man across from Allen's and hope for Gut Punch to trigger. Put your best melee attackers across the big tanks to get more DPS. This is basically just saying, be aware, not every team is going to be a one-size-fits-all. Sometimes you can use Omni-Man's Gut Punch or Angstrom's ability to do an insta-kill on characters like Allen and bypass their death save abilities. So that's kind of something to keep in mind there. Next, if different placements don't make a difference, you can also try shuffling it up by putting Doc Seismic in the front. He will stun his attacker and fly back, making the attacker randomly choose new targets. This takes time and is of course not helpful when you are still able to get higher than 3,800. Doc Seismic is an interesting one. I rated him basically as alright when I talked about him, and I still stand by that, but when he works well. And is probably the definitive ranged DPS in the game right now. Basically, when a character gets too close to him, he stuns him and jumps a freaking mile away just for the heck of it. and that can be helpful in throwing off the enemy and giving yourself some much needed momentum. So just kind of something to factor in there. So that is the guide. I think it's pretty thorough and definitive. I don't have a lot to say about it. I agree with everything on it. If I were to add any points at all, I think the first point I would add is be aware of the restricted events. Usually it's like every weekend. Lately we've been having them based on faction, but we could have them based on other tags as well. So kind of keep in mind when you're deciding who you want to build that these faction restrictions are a thing. Maybe you want to build that 5th GDA character. Like you might be trying to decide on another Earth Defender when your Earth Defender team is already fine, or a 5th proper GDA character. I'm not counting Duplicate because Duplicate is not proper what I've done to her at all. It's, that was a lot of resources. So just be aware and try to build a proper team of each faction. This is a long-term goal. This is not something you're going to do overnight in a day. But just kind of something to keep in mind is be aware that restrictions are a thing. I do think it'd be interesting if we ever had a restriction where it was like, only attackers can be used, or perhaps only Viltrumites can be used, and we get more Viltrumites in the game. Something to just spice it up a little bit, kind of encourage that creativity. I think that would be pretty cool. And I think the last tip I would give here, and it's not really a tip, more so a mindset thing, don't worry about the leaderboard. I've spent a pretty penny on this game, and I never stay in top 100. Ever. And unless you actively whale constantly, you probably won't either. Tyler and some of these other people spent some pretty pennies to get as high as they are, and hey, more power to them. People like that keep the game alive. That is how this industry works. But when you're looking at this leaderboard, don't worry about it. Treat it as an icing. Treat it as a cherry on top. Not even the icing. Just treat it as the cherry on top. If you manage to squeak out some gems in a dossier or some other kind of reward from it, great. But don't worry about it. The meat of your rewards are coming from the individual stages. Anything that's not divisible by 5, if you get up to 3 stars, you get a lot of hero XP and hero special XP, and it adds up in a hurry because each of these stages are getting you more and more and more, allowing you to be more effective and efficient in leveling up your characters. Additionally, you of course have every 5 or so, you can get gems and dossiers, you can get schools out access cards, sometimes you can get artifact XP or lab coins depending on what kind of CECIL'S Nightmare it is, and these rewards pretty much dwarf anything you're realistically going to get from the leaderboard. This is just a little something extra to give the whales some bragging rights. And hey, that's a good thing. Because, again, whales are what keeps the game alive. If we didn't have people who spent money in this game, we just wouldn't have a game. That's the nature of the industry. So there's no problem with this whatsoever, in my opinion. Just don't go crazy for it. Don't be like, okay, well, I have to hit top 100 or else I don't get a Schools Out access card. You know the problem with top 100? Is that only 100 people are going to make it, and realistically speaking, unless you are spending some serious coin, it's probably not going to be you. That's just the reality of it. But don't let that dissuade you, because this is just a little extra. The meat of the loot is especially these first 20 or so. You get a ton of XP, and actually a pretty healthy number of gems and dossiers as well. So just treat the leaderboard as an extra thing. And yeah, that's pretty much all we have for today. Again, massive thanks to Phili and Tyler for the guide. Again, I will be linking their Discord down in the description below. There are a ton more infographics where that came from. They've got a cool team over there who just kind of do research on the game and seem to be really passionate about the Invincible brand as a whole. So yeah, go check that out. And then we shall see you next time. Have a good one.